Hello and welcome to the Ghibli Rewatch series of the Overly Animated Podcast, where we'll be going through every Studio Ghibli movie chronologically from the beginning. I'm Dylan Hysen, and today I'm joined by Michelle Anderer.
Hello.
And Delaney Stovall.
Hey, y'all.
Yes, the Ghibli Rewatch series. Join us in rewatching or watching for the first time all the Studio Ghibli movies now that they're available for streaming on HBO Max in the United States and Netflix in most of the rest of the world. New podcasts up every Wednesday as we go through the whole Ghibli catalog chronologically. Find all our contact information, everything about our normal podcasts at overlyanimated.com. I'm a Ghibli expert and will be joined by people with a variety of Ghibli experience here. And today is Only Yesterday. We'll be getting into spoilers for this entire movie. Make sure you have seen Only Yesterday before you continue listening into this podcast. Only minor or vague spoilers for other Ghibli movies we'll discuss. And we'll be talking about both the sub and dubs. So watch whatever for this movie, and then come and back and listen to Only Yesterday. So, getting into Only Yesterday, this is a 1991 film from director Isao Takahata. It is based on a manga by Hotaru Okamoto and Yuko Tone, which, interestingly, the manga only features the younger Taiko scenes. So the childhood, the 10-year-old Taiko scenes are what the manga's about. Takahata added that layer of adult Taiko reminiscing on her younger self to make the film. I think surprisingly to me, this was a big success in Japan when it came out and was the highest grossing film of 1991 in Japan.
Yeah, take that, other movies.
Other movies in 1991. But contrast that with the fact that this was the last Studio Ghibli major feature to get an English dub. They had so little confidence in its marketability in the United States, despite the fact that it was the highest grossing Japan movie that year. Only got a dub in 2016, a few years ago. That was kind of a big deal when it happened, and so I'm glad that people are finally seeing this movie. This movie is striking for its juxtaposition of these two time periods in Taiko's life, which are animated in different styles. This is one of my personal favorites, and I think very popular among kind of like our staff and group. So I'm excited to get into Only Yesterday. Michelle, experienced Ghibli viewer, what's your history with Only Yesterday, and what do you think of this movie?
So this is one of those movies that I tried to watch when I was in my teen years, and it was absolutely impossible to illegally find on the internet,
Yes.
in addition to legally from a red box or a blockbuster. Incredibly hard to track down. So I think it took to my junior year of college before I finally found a site that had it. And I watched it and I really liked it, but it honestly wasn't one that I had ever seen since that one time up until this rewatch. And I think it's just because well, for one thing, now I am 27, so I'm her age. So it feels very important. It's yeah, you do a lot of life thinking when you are approaching 30. You're well, do I want to change it all up and go to the country? Or do I like my job and it's fine? But I think the other reason I didn't rewatch it a lot, like I would with say Kiki or Spirited Away, is because a lot of the flashbacks, especially to her younger self, it's very realistic, I would presume, of that time period in Japan. But it's not super fun. I mean, a lot of it is her learning kind of tough lessons about her family can't afford to go to the country all her friends, or she can't act in that high school play because dad said no, and he's the head of the household. It's that kind of stuff that's so grounded in reality. That's I really enjoy watching it, but it's not super escapist in a way that's incredibly fun. So I think for what it is, it's an amazing movie, and I feel the older I get, the more I'm going to appreciate it. But it is definitely a different flavor from, say, a Miyazaki movie for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We'll get into this movie and how it is an example of the differences between kind of a Takahata movie and a Miyazaki movie. Delaney, you are newer to some of these Ghibli movies, and I believe you just watched Only Yesterday for the first time, so tell us what you think.
just finished it. I've never seen it before. I was definitely not prepared for this movie in that, based on all of the other Studio Ghibli movies I've seen, which are, I think so far, every single one of them has been Miyazaki. So I wasn't prepared for this movie, which is very different tonally, and also the stark difference in the animation styles was also something jarring. It took me a little bit in the beginning of the movie to figure. I think mainly because I've been watching the subbed. I've been watching all the Studio Ghibli movies in Japanese, so it took me a minute because I don't know all the characters yet to figure out that it was the same character who was a child and then also an adult, because it was unclear, because I was like, I don't know who any of these people are anyway. So it took me a little bit, not too long, but I was like, okay, I understand what's happening now. And then I think the premise of the movie is really interesting, and how it's structured narratively is very interesting. I mean, I have to say, this isn't this isn't going to be my top 5 Ghibli movies. It was fine. And I think what hurt this movie is I watched Kiki's Delivery Service for the first time before this movie today. Mm-hmm. So I woke up this morning and watched Kiki's Delivery Service, and I was like, this is the best movie ever. And then I watched this movie. And I don't want to be mean to Only Yesterday, but it's very much a different movie. And, it's kind of one of those, movies, you can almost make this argument about Totoro. It's a movie where nothing happens. And it's this is the kind of movie I don't watch normally anyway. I don't, you were talking about, this is a, people would call it perhaps a rom-com, and I don't watch those movies anyway at all. So it was different for me to just, I was like, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what this movie was about. So it was interesting. And I think it was good to watch it. It's always good to watch. Every type of movie should be made into animation. They should all exist as animated movies as well. And I definitely think narratively and visually, this movie is very interesting. But I'm definitely in the middle on it, because I was satisfied with the ending, because I was about to get mad if she didn't go back to him, because I was like, come on, let's go. But I would say, I will make the comment, this movie came out in 1991. We are in 2020, and me and my fiance were like, is she gay? I hope she's gay. I knew the answer was she is not gay. And so I was like, I would have infinitely enjoyed this movie more if she was gay. Because, they even have that little, the thing that got that I was like, what? This is interesting. Granted, I also don't know how this was dubbed, because I didn't watch it. But when she's talking about her sister, and she blushes when she's looking at that poster of her favorite actress, and I was like, intriguing. So it's it was a good movie. And I think it's another one of the things. It's from 1991, and it's depicting Japan in the 60s and 70s, and closer to, I think we're in.
We got 1966 and 1982 as our two.
Yeah, and I was in the 80s. Yeah, so it was very 80s when we were in the 80s, but so I think sometimes it's hard to watch movies that are depicting things in those time periods, and I do think that impacts this film.
Yeah,
and it's also because you don't expect them in a Miyazaki film, the attitudes and some of the behaviors that occurred were shocking to me.
That's true. I do think we say a lot more that Miyazaki movies feel timeless, but this feels very of a certain time, which I think for me is fun, because it feels like a historical look back into the past, but it does leave you with a certainly different feeling.
Yeah, we can talk about that. That's an interesting point, and you guys can maybe say ways you thought of that. Some things Delaney brought up, but we did get to Grave of the Fireflies already, so this is only the second non-Miyazaki movie out of our 7th Ghibli movie, only second non-Miyazaki movie we're covering here. That'll start to be a little more skewed in the other direction as we keep going. Taiko, not gay herself, but this movie does feature Studio Ghibli's first gay character in one of Taiko's sisters, which we'll talk about, as you mentioned, the scene, Delaney.
That's canon?
It's unclear what canon means in this context. I don't know how else you interpret that scene, in my opinion, but I guess you could
there's
interpret it a different way.
There's no other way.
Which is striking, considering is this Studio Ghibli's only, potentially, depending on how you view it, explicitly portrayed gay character in its history.
Mm-hmm. when Marnie was there, like, we'll talk about it.
Oh yeah, well, in a few months we'll get to that one.
Yeah.
This crew will come back for that movie in a few months.
Don't worry. I am ready. Like, as soon as this happened, I was like, Dylan, I have to be there to talk about when Marnie was
it's the last
there.
one. It's not for a while, but yeah, we'll get. Yeah, I feel it. And I'm not shocked Delaney didn't immediately respond super positively to this movie. I mean, I think that this is a slow-paced, very realistic slice of life type movie. So yeah, we'll compare it to Kiki, but for me, this is an all-time classic. Probably my favorite Takahata movie. I really love Only Yesterday. I've always loved this movie. I mean, I'm not sure I responded as amazingly to it when I watched it for the first time as a teenager. I guess I had better illegal sources that I found than Michelle because I was.
You did.
But it is no. I mean, there was not an official English release for many years, so it's not like. Anyone should have seen it before. They just didn't distribute it, which is super annoying. Oh, and I will say, Taiko voiced by Daisy Ridley in the 2016 dub.
I missed that. Oh my god.
Yeah, the dub is. I did watch the dub at some point. It is pretty fun. And I think the guy is Dev Patel. So
okay. Every time I don't watch the dub, y'all are like, it has all these like. The last one, like in Totoro, it was like, oh, it was Dakota and Elephant. And I'm like, I need to just watch the dub. It's extremely irritating.
I didn't know that. Oh,
that's what the Totoro dub's magical as the Fanning sisters as kids. But no, this is like the most recent dub, so you get like contemporary big names. So like Daisy Ridley, yeah.
And Dev Patel, that's amazing. Patel, Why didn't I watch the dub?
It's a good combination. No, I in my opinion, this is especially a type of movie you should watch in Japanese because it is very like much set in Japan and about. Yeah. You know, like those are the movies I think about Japanese culture. The most movies you should definitely watch subbed, but subjective. We discussed reasons why and why not. I love the juxtaposition this movie provides of the reminiscing on the past, the two different animation styles. It fascinates me. It's something I've rarely seen since. I mean, this movie is still incredibly notable in animation history. The way this movie is feminist, I think, is still incredibly notable and striking compared to any movie today. I think if this movie came out this year, it would be the most feminist animated release by far of the year. And same thing with Kiki. And the fact that these two movies came out in end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, and the times have not advanced, I guess, enough that they're still particularly notable, I think is striking. But this is kind of my type of movie. I'm more into kind of slow-paced, character-based, realistic movies. So Takahata's movies do appeal to me a lot. I totally understand if people don't connect to this as much. I do think it maybe takes a few watches. I think certain scenes in this movie are some of my favorites ever, particularly the pineapple scene.
Oh,
talk about the pineapple scene.
Oh my gosh.
The ending, the ending I think has been controversial when we've discussed it in the past. We'll maybe talk about why. The ending worked really well for me this time. Actually, it was like very magical. I
agree.
It was interesting how I responded to it differently. I don't know if I had other things about Only Yesterday, but we'll talk about them as we bring them up. But I mentioned it, but like the starting point, I don't know how much there's to say about it. This is like an adult drama for women. This movie,
yes. Oh, that's exactly true. That is what it is.
That's unheard of in American animation circles, right? And even in modern anime, there's not a lot of these. So I mean it's very notable that Studio Ghibli back to back, it's two pillar directors here create these movies made kind of for women. This movie from Takahata more explicitly directed at adults. I think that this is the most clear indication of Studio Ghibli's feminism on display. But it's definitely striking how they're next to each other. But yeah, Michelle, how did that kind of shape your viewing of this movie? This kind of being this, have we ever talked about an adult drama aimed at women like on this podcast in general? It's kind of crazy.
She might be the oldest main character like lady in the Ghibli canon, frankly, because one thing that did really strike me, even when I first watched it, is that adult Taiko, she has cheekbones and and it's not just her, like her love interest does also, but it's like we're so used to that kind of like baby face moe anime girl who still like has all of her baby fat, like very round faced person that we aren't used to seeing, like adult women that have like their faces thinned out a bit because they're adults now, that have more prominent cheekbones. Like that's a sign of age and of maturity. But that's like hardly ever an anime, like period. And I really, really like that she has cheekbones and that they're like always there whenever she's like talking or smiling. Like at first it distracted me just because I was so not used to seeing that. But I actually think it's a really lovely detail that shows like, yeah, she's a grown woman. This is her face, you know? Like, don't be afraid of getting older. Like, it's fine. She's happy. She's like figuring stuff out.
Yeah, I think this is going to tie into our discussion on the animation styles because you're bringing up. I agree, it's kind of like the aspect of this being an adult movie, but that this is the realistic style of the kind of present of the movie. The fact that there are kind of these illustrated facial muscles is a defining feature of this animation style, which is very different from the normal anime style. Which is the normal anime style is more of what the flashbacks are presented in. They're kind of, the flashbacks are kind of animated in maybe a cute style. I think it has like an ethereal quality to it. Because
it's like her memories, so it's like her kind of
it captures that
version of the past.
Yeah, and the modern, the present, which is depicting 1982, so it's not present for when the movie's made, but the present relative to the characters is depicting. Has this realistic style. I have a quote that can bring in more information on them. This is from Studio Ghibli, the films of Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata by Colin, Odell, and Michel LeBlanc. They say, Takahata seamlessly mixes the two pasts together, with Taiko occasionally even meeting her younger self. The two animation styles complement each other in a delicate but pronounced way, and the temporal leaps are effortless. The 1980s are animated in a realistic style, etching out the lines on the faces of the characters or noting the perfect detail in a single head of safflower pollinated by a bee. The 1960s are shown in a more stylized manner with pastel, almost diffused edges to the frames, sketched out with items of memorabilia. For the most part, Only Yesterday is so grounded in detail that, in the brief moments when it departs from realism, the effect is startling. When schoolgirl Taiko first experiences teenage romance, she is so elated that she literally walks upwards into the clouds.
Yes.
I love that part. Like, for a minute, you're like, was that an animation mistake? You're like, oh no, she's just really happy right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's kind of details on these two different animation styles. There's also like a note in that quote about the realisticness of the movie, which we talked a lot about in our Grave of the Fireflies podcast. That is Takahata's signature, is intense realism, which I think this movie is absolutely demonstrates that. I think maybe I like how you tied it into the kind of discussion where I was leading of the feminist aspects of the movie, but just displaying the realisticness of older characters and also just the nature aimed at older women, that Michelle was talking about I think it's like really well captured by the animation style choices. Delaney, how did, I guess either aspect, kind of how did the two styles play for you? Was it jarring? And then, like just this being like this adult drama for women, like very different from what we normally talk about.
Yes. I will say the animation, like I was extremely distracted by her cheekbones the entire movie. And I think it was one of those, and I don't know if y'all felt this way or not. And I think it also has to do with, how so infrequent are women basically women who are like over 18 and under 65 don't exist in animation. Like they're not real. So like, to me, she looked significantly older than being 27. Like, she's not old.
I also think
27.
My first response is always like she's in her 30s or something. But it's just because we're not used to these characters being drawn of, you're right.
Well, by that same token, though, I do think she was maybe drawn older on purpose in that, like, because, like, kind of that cultural perception. Because everyone makes comments frequently throughout the movie that she's so old. I'm like, she's 27. Like, bro, like she's not that old.
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with kind of this expectations of of women reaching a certain age having to settle down. Yeah, right. And maybe they're capturing that expectation by how they're drawing her.
Yeah, because she looked significantly older than 27, and then And again, it is jarring, the two different animation styles. And I didn't click immediately with me that they were like so different. It was just more like, again, so distracted by her cheekbones. But again, that, that ultra realism that we're having. And I preferred watching, like, it was more pleasant to watch Teiko as a child, just because it was so much more visually pleasing. Like, literally, like, child Teiko glows. Like, literally is like glows. And that's really what stuck out to me, and like, especially the later parts of the film, was like, she is like so much brighter than adult Teiko. Like, it's ridiculous. And so, like, that was something that I like really like noticed and really stood out to me. And again, it's hard, like, for being in 1991, this is definitely a feminist like movie. But again, it's also hard because of how much they play into the 1980s expectation for Japanese women, because like the actual, like, and again, it's interesting. Like, there's some interesting things playing at this movie. Like, she is, she's not living the quote unquote expected life for her. She is a woman living in the city. She lives alone. She works. And she is part of that movement of women there are more women who wait to marry, who are working, who live alone, who, it's just, that was very much like that culturally, that's what was happening. And then, of course, these men in the countryside can't find wives because they all went to the city. And this is a cultural, this is happening right now in China. Like, this is what's going on, and it's fine. And it's just interesting what they do with, like, what they're doing with her, because she's doing what she wants. Like, she's like, oh, well, when I just want to, I go, to the farm. Like, it was very startling at the beginning of the movie when her boss is like, oh, did you break up with your boyfriend? And she's like, no. Like, but then it turns out she had actually turned down a proposal. I don't know how recent that was, but it was clearly very recent to the beginning of the film. And so it's just, for 1991, I would say this movie's feminist, but for me, it's hard for it to track now as watching this movie in 2020, where the ultimate victory of the movie is she goes to live on a farm with this dude and they get married.
Yeah, so to clarify, Delaney, did you find that it's hard to put this movie into modern feminist context because of its realistic portrayal kind of expectations of women at the time? Or is it that the movie played into those expectations? Like, was it portraying it, or you're right, like you talked about the decision at the end. Did you have a hard time grappling with that because it's maybe not what you would view as a feminist ending?
Well, and it's one of those things, like, it's hard to say either way, because one thing, there is nothing wrong with going to live on the farm and marrying this dude. Like, that in of itself is not anti-feminist. Like, like, that's not the problem. But then but like, basically we've been watching the moments of like tension in the movie all have to deal with her interactions with boys, which is not necessarily like the best portrayal of like her growth as a human. Because the way I read the movie is that she doesn't like, this is a coming of age story, but it's her like being 27 and then suddenly realizing like how the world works. And it's like, what? So it's very odd. Like,
I would say, like, I don't know if it's her realizing how the world works. One thing that really struck me early on is that she really doesn't seem to like her job, which is, like, again, fine, but, like, it's not something that gives her any kind of joy at all. Right. And I think for her, like, she's in her late 20s, she's financially independent, she's feeling, I think, more listless in just her life direction more than anything. And she knows she likes going on the farming trips, but one thing I do appreciate is like when the grandmas really like pry and get into her business and on her case, like in the third act, like she has this meltdown, like this moment of crisis, because she's been working great on the farm for like 10 days, but then she's real with herself. And I'm glad that the movie like goes into this, and she basically says like, I feel like if I accepted, I'd be lying to them, because it's easy to like do something good for 10 days, but like, I don't know if I could keep this up for longer than that. And the thought of really committing scares her for that reason, because it's also hypothetical and she isn't used to like really doing that sort of thing long term. And she knows it'd be a big adjustment. I think like if she say liked her job better, or she had like more of a sense of community, I don't think she really knows anyone in the city. Like we see her talking to her, I believe, older sister on the phone, and her older sister's the one who's like bothering her about like, oh, aren't you seeing anyone? Or like, why do you want to go to the country? Don't you want to like go somewhere fancy, like a hotel? Because like that's the kind of stuff her older sister likes. But to me, like it makes a little more sense that she wants to go to the country, because she seems to value the country more than like her sisters ever did. Like she goes on that trip with her grandma to all the bathhouses, and she makes that comment about like, oh, my sisters would never want to do something like this. So it kind of sets her up as a kind of alternative girl, maybe, to like her more traditional sisters. So like I get it, like the way it's framed, it's like, yeah, she does kind of leave like all that independence behind for this guy, but also like she seemed like she really needed to like try something different, maybe permanently, just because like she was alone in the city and didn't really like her job. And I think like if the country does make her happy, and she does genuinely like work really well with him and his family, and she gets a sense of accomplishment, which she was definitely missing from that job in Tokyo, I think like it became a lot more plausible that this is something that made like positive sense for her as a character.
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead, Delaney.
Well, for me, like I think the real disconnect for me in this movie, I think, is so all the movies I've watched Nausicaa, I've watched Totoro, like, you know, there is in all of, you know, so far, Studio Ghibli very much hammers home this the countryside is better than city life. We've discussed this about Miyazaki, you know, the kind of the Walden like fairy tale, like the whole idea of like going back to nature, and like it's so much better than city life. And I think what gets me about this movie is that it plays its cards too hard, and it doesn't convince me. Like
that the countryside isn't better than
yeah, because like for me, like I can respect, like obviously it's gorgeous, and also, and again, this movie is very much a product of its times. Like there is a lot of there is a lot of cultural. This movie depends on the cultural context of.
Yeah, in what way do you think that?
Well, I think because like, and then these are other movies too that, you know, we've talked about, in especially like the different books you reference quite frequently about Miyazaki's, like, you know, the economic boom in Japan during the 80s, which is just beginning, and when the present in this movie is set. And this movie is much more, like we were talking about, much more realistic. It is very much set in the 60s and then in the 80s in Japan. And there's all this context of the economic boom. People are leaving the countryside in droves to move to the cities. Farming, it like Japan's agrarian economy is
which
like
I think
collapsing.
You're correctly pointing out that context. Yeah,
right. And I know that context without watching the movie. But then, like, now you watch it in the movie and it's there, but I don't think it's there enough to really, like, for the movie to exist outside of the time in which it was released and the times that it's relying on. Like, it's relying on you to have context to watch this movie. Because, like, oh yeah, she just, like, you know, and I agree with Michelle. I'm really glad that they brought, like, oh, this girl just goes on holiday for 20 days and she suddenly decides she wants to be a farmer.
I know, it's like kind of crazy.
And like they make that commentary, and I think that was a really valid comment, because, you know, she makes comments like, oh, I read this. And I'm like, that's cool. And I'm really glad when she said she was play farming. That really was a good moment, I think, in the film. But it's just, I just don't think they do I don't know. Again, she's play farming. This is a vacation. And then she decides to, it's not like there was anything for her in Tokyo, which I think that's one of the points of the film. But it doesn't sit right. Like, I just didn't feel blown away or compelled by this film in the way I have other Ghibli movies, like the messages behind Nausicaa and Totoro, versus this, in which they kind of talk about organic farming. It's kind of weird the way they cover organic farming. It's interesting how they do that. And I don't know. It's just, I'm just not sold. Like, I'm like, why did you move? Like, I think
you're talking about the ending a lot.
I am talking about, it's just, there's a lot of basically for me is like, I think there are good messages in this film, but they wrap it all up in the romance, which they sold me on the romance. Toshio's good boy.
Yeah,
like,
he's good boy.
He's good boy. I like him. He's cute. He like, it's good. Toshio's sweet. He's a good guy. But then they wrap up all their messages, and it's all like dependent on this romance and not her actual drive or desire or like, you know, belief that the countryside is better, if that makes sense. Like, so I think for me, that's where the movie kind of falls apart a little bit.
Let's talk about that. We're hitting on a lot of different things. So to quickly hit on two things you previously mentioned, Delaney, one of which is the context surround you're saying like maybe the movie isn't presenting as much context for what's happening, which you're aware of, but I think that's fair. I know, having seen the movie a bunch, I know there's these small moments. I think the character of the like teenage girl when she's in the present, I think is largely a context setting character. There are these moments when she says,
you mean when she yells Puma?
The Puma stuff, it's
Puma,
like these kids are this dynamic of the kids in the countryside are longing for modernity in the city, and then some people like the main character are in the city and longing for the countryside, this kind of cyclical nature. And then also she's like, there's less kids in my class. So there are these kind of context setting moments. They are small though. But I think that's an interesting point. You're talking about you're not connecting as much, and I think it's a big, and we can talk about the themes presented. I do think thematically, in terms of this return to countryside, this is one of Ghibli's most explicit movies in discussing that, which I think you kind of mentioned. I think there's an entire conversation between the two leads about that theme, which we can talk about kind of in our environmentalism section. But in terms of not connecting to it, I think it's probably hard to compare a movie like this with all these Miyazaki movies, which we previously discussed. You know, this movie doesn't have this fantasy element to it. And I think it's very striking compared to all of these. But the ending, I mean, one commonality, getting back to the ending, like we've discussed these potentially controversial endings to Miyazaki movies, or at least endings you can interpret in different ways. This is definitely, I think, kind of a controversial ending in the regard that Delaney is responding to it. And Delaney, you described this as a rom-com in the beginning, and I've seen other people talk about this movie as a romance movie. Personally, I've never seen it as a romance movie, but I've always seen people talk about it like that. So I know that there's these different interpretations of the movie. And this and how that plays into the ending is really interesting, because she goes back at the end. She doesn't discuss going back for the guy. It's just an implied thing, right? Like it's not, you don't see them getting married. You don't see that they're going to live together. The grandma proposes that. But she just wants to go back to maybe reconnect with this life. What component of that is for the guy? I think that's a big factor in how you're going to interpret this ending.
I think that's a good point. And I'll say two things. I think one thing that struck me when Delaney was saying, like, I just don't buy that she'd want to go back to the country. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, even though there isn't necessarily anything for her in Tokyo. I think maybe part of I wouldn't call this an issue, because I get it, but because this movie is so like it's so bent on realism, you get this very like unglamorized, very realistic look at farming. And even though they have like nice montages of like, you know, grabbing all these like heads of flowers and stomping them into red paste, and like you see the whole process, and it's very interesting and informative, it does not look like a lot of fun to me personally. Like, that is not something I would want to spend days and days and days and months of the year doing. It looks like grueling, backbreaking work. But I think like the thing that like sells it for me for Teiko is that like for her, she does seem to really enjoy it. And granted, it hasn't been that long, but like I would not survive 10 days straight making those flowers into a red paste. Like I would be like, sorry, I don't love my job, but like I do think it's better than this. I'm gonna go back. I'll see you like at Christmas time or something, family. And so for her, like, I wasn't like convinced personally, but because it's her decision and I like buy into her character liking it, I can see why that's part of her motivation for wanting to just go back. Because like, yeah, if she really likes the hands-on work, maybe that is a better decision for her. And I will echo, like, I agree with Dylan. I think like we're going to talk about what Toshio does so right that so many like love interests do so wrong when it comes to heterosexual pairings, because there's a lot of good things he does. But I do think like her decision to go back was more about just like the active conscious decision of taking a new life path than necessarily it being about him. Like, he's a part of it for sure. She likes him. She wants to see more of him. But I think it was like, again, you know, she went through school growing up, like, maybe I'll be an actress. I don't know. Like, she didn't really have a lot of direction. And it seemed like she went to the city without a lot of things figured out or direction either. And this was like a very pivotal time in her life where she did make a very clear direction. And I think hopefully that's why, like, at the end, when you see like all the school children, like, trying to get her to go back and them cheering her on when she meets up with the guy, is like, they're happy she's figured out where she wants to be and like what her place is and what feels right to her, and that she's like decided this for herself. So that's like the best I can take away from it. And that's not something I totally honestly feel like I got the first time I watched it, like, what, 10 years ago? But I think for me now, like, that's definitely how I feel. Yeah,
and I will say, I've struggled with this ending. So, like,
it's not,
like,
it's not
Delaney not immediately connecting with it. Like, I experienced the same thing, you know, like, it's kind of taken a while.
I just don't buy Taiko's character. Like, here's the thing, like, I don't know, like, and I'm not trying to be like I hated this movie, because I didn't. Like, it was beautiful and I enjoyed many parts of the movie. But like, I think I think part of it is because this movie is so different narratively, and also Taiko herself is a very different character in that, you know, she's very much almost a foil to Nausicaa, in that she is never certain of whatever is going on, whereas Nausicaa is very certain at all moments of what she's doing.
I love that anti-Nausicaa thing. She's not taking decisive action for most of her life.
Yeah.
Like, that's Nausicaa's defining trait.
Also, and like, I feel bad. Okay, so like, let's talk about child Taiko. So like, she, like, for most of the movie, you're kind of like, she sucks. Now, granted, she's a 10-year-old girl and her family life is not great. And like, you know, and she's held to all these expectations. Like, she's bad at math. She probably just needed some help, y'all, but like, whatever. And, you know, she's under a lot of pressure, and people aren't, you know, being a kid sucks. It's hard, like, been there, done that. And like, so you spend a lot of the movie exploring this not glamorous part of being a child. So it's hard really to get a read on who she is as a character. And then we get to her as an adult, and she's like, I'm not going to say she's blank faced, but like, she just spends the entire part, like, she's smiling like the whole movie, which is great. I'm glad that she's a happy person, but like, it's just these fragmented memories. And it turns out she's telling people these memories, and it's like, no wonder everyone thinks she's kind of weird. Like, but like, I mean, honestly, legitimately, like, for me, the reason, like, I think, like, cause I've really got this whole, like, she's really thinking about, like, you know, what did she want at 10 years old? And then, like, what is she doing now? Like, what, she's exploring these thoughts and feelings. Like, these are pivotal moments in her life. And she was listless at 10, and now she's listless at 27. Like, you know, trying to connect those moments, try to get back to something, some sort of something to grasp at. And then, but then at the end of the movie, she's talking about her last memory, and it's about this boy. And it turns out the answer is that he probably liked her. And then she goes back. So that's, for me, is that this is where everything starts to go downhill, because it's like, I was really proud, you know, she ran away and like kind of trying to figure out what she wants. And that's the thing, I think, for me, is why you have to, like, I'm not saying you have to, but that's why it's very much like easy to read this as a romance ending, which doesn't make it bad at all in general, but like, it's hard to connect to in this. And again, like, all, like, everything about her as a child was her interactions with boys. All of them had to do with boys. About when Hirohata, or I think that was his name, was was, you know, had a crush on her. And then
I think that's an interesting point. A lot of her memories are male focused.
Yes.
You know, even the one with her becoming an actress ultimately is about her dad, and then the time her dad hits her. You could argue, you know, a realistic.
And then even when she's telling that memory, she's like, "Oh, he only hit me once." I'm like, "Is there any depth to you at all?" Like, because I think
she even follows it up, like when the younger teenage girl says, like, "Oh, my dad hits me like kind of frequently." She's like, "Well, maybe that's better." Like, and I was like, "What?"
thing. Like that's for me.
Yeah, well, that's a situation I do think we're lacking kind of the cultural context of
for sure
punishment in Japan.
Well, there's cultural context, but regardless, it's not good.
I think that's clearly like a really scarring and bad memory for her, even though she's like, she's trying to frame it in a positive way.
Yeah,
I
think that's like for me is that like the movie just doesn't do a lot to like get you anywhere. Like I think it's very much they present you all of these things and then they're like, the movie's over. Reflect on it as you will, which I think is part of like maybe my problem with the movie. Because I'm like,
that's why it's a drama. Yeah,
it is a drama. It's very much a drama, and it's just and then the movie ends, and I'm like, what was that? Granted, I would have been mad at the end if she didn't go back to him, but still, like, because me and my fiance were like, does she go back? We were like, there's 6 minutes left. She better turn around. Like, I'm getting irritated, but like, I don't know. Like I wanted this movie to be about more than it was, I guess. Which maybe I don't like slice of life, which is fine. Maybe I'm just figuring this out. It's just it's just interesting this, the environmentalism, which is so heavy. It is so heavy-handed in this movie, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But for me, that ends up not being the point of the movie, which I think is my problem. Like Nausicaa, that was the point of the movie. Like the ultimate,
it's interesting. We can talk about that. How the themes play into each other.
I mean, the point of the movie really is Teiko herself. It's like not anything else. It's really just like, what does she want to do at this point in her life?
Yeah. I think
that's it.
It's about so okay. I mean, there's this. I think you're Delaney hit on the open-endedness of the ending, which I want to read a quote on. But before, like my view of the ending, I think like is similar to what Michelle's is, which is just this. This is about her culminating this transformative moment in her life, and she achieves that by looking back on things in her past and her taking this new experience and deciding, kind of for the first time in her life, that she wants to move in this different direction. And as she's been in Tokyo her entire life. She grew up there in the past, and she's still living there now. And she decides and she's doing this job she doesn't seem to have a lot of connection with. She's finding connection in farming. She's finding connection with nature and how humans relate to nature. And she decides she wants to, and these people too, and these hardworking people. And it culminates in this transformative moment when she wants to go back, and kind of that's how the movie ends. And the tying of the themes would be, she's going back to the country. A lot of it's because of these, this nature, like morals and stuff that she's connecting with. And that's so like, it's just a component into like this big moment, I think. To me, everything ties into this being a big transformative moment in her life. And and the brilliance, I think, of the memories is those are being fodder for her ultimately making this decision. That's what's so unique to me about the movie, is how those are presented as a connection to this big action being ultimately taken by her.
And I'd say, like, honestly, that's only something you can really make sense of in hindsight. Very much not so, like, watching this movie, not knowing where it's going. And I
will say, I do think that a lot of the movie would be reframed watching it. Yeah.
I think it's something like, you watch it and then you're kind of like, oh, that's what that was. Okay, what do I do with this? And then it might honestly take like a few times to decide like if you really like it or not. Because like, yeah, like I think we're so used to things being more obvious. But I feel like the point of this one, you don't really figure out this is even a big moment till the very, very end. And it's like, oh, that's why, like, all these flashbacks were even relevant. Because, like, before, it's like, why is she, like, sharing all this information to these people she doesn't know that well? But it's like, because, like, she's decided that this is kind of like a big turning point moment, maybe. And she's, like, processing through everything. But, like, in the moment, you really don't, like, have any reason to like get that. So it takes a little time, I'd say, too, to see it that way even.
Yeah, and I also see the romance just as like a component of the overall bigger decision to make a transformation in her life. I see it's very similar to how Michelle presented it. That being said, I've certainly seen other people besides Delaney, and I've seen I've read different perspectives online. People see this kind of as a romance. I mean, they spend a lot of time together, and it's pretty heavily implied she would go back for him at least part in the end. So I think that's like a very valid reading of the movie. Personally, I've always seen that as like a subset of just this general decision and transformation in her life. I think the movie works better if you're able to read it that way. Not that you need to or anything, or you should.
Well, it's like when I think about moments in the movie, like talking about the chrysalis and, turning into a butterfly, and then like, different,
Yeah, that's a pretty explicit depiction of what we're talking about.
It's a very explicit, but my thing is that's in like, this is a 2-hour movie and it's at like the hour mark. And then by the time we get to the end, I don't even remember that. And so like part of me is like, to me, it's almost like they lost the thread. Like, to me, it didn't feel like that big transformative decision. Like, if that makes, like, the memories, like, I think it's very narratively interesting, but I don't know if it's, like, I don't know. It's just very disjointed, which is the point.
It just didn't all come together for you, which I think is very valid.
Like, it just didn't. And, like, and I think a lot of it is I just wasn't sold on her character because we just go from, like, this bratty 10-year-old, which is, like, totally fair. All 10-year-olds suck.
Yeah.
Honestly, I feel like it's less, and I think this is true of a lot of Miyazaki's. It's less about her specifically as like a lens into this life transformation. Like I feel like it's like the audience like connecting with what she's going through more. Yeah, it's not her.
Yeah, I think for me that's where this movie loses it because that's like because you're just watching all these terrible things happen to her, and I feel bad for her. I do like throughout the film, and then but then she's an adult and she's just like, yeah. And I'm like, what? Like, what is going on? And so I think that's part of it's for me is that there is nothing like drawing me into her specifically. Like, I'm just watching all these events.
Yeah, I think it's fair. We can talk about how the past...
closest we get to really getting in her head are these like, these, they're not dream sequences, but like, when she's like walking through the air or when she's swimming, in that like rainbow background, like that kind of stuff is like the closest we get to any sort of like actual like thought or like how she's feeling.
Well, I can think of a couple others, like when everyone's really excited about the pineapple, like, oh, it smells so good. And then they start eating it and they've never had one before. And they're like, oh, it tastes really hard. And they start giving all their slices to her. And you can tell she doesn't actually like it, but she's like so committed to just accepting it that she just eats them anyway because she's so stubborn. I feel like that was a really nice moment to show like, yeah, she can stick to her guns when she really wants to.
Yeah, Delaney's describing many of these past memories as negative or like, I do think there are some positive memories, but I do think you kind of get this overall sense of the reflecting on bad things that happened to her. But I think that's interesting that was the powerful takeaway for you was kind of the negative nature of the memories.
Well, a lot of it, she just seems very restrained, like and controlled, like her whole life. And then it makes sense that she'd want to go back to the country. But then for me, it's just, she doesn't say anything or act like it. And I'm like, why? Like, are you just here?
It's very internal transformation, I guess, that's going on. So I have a quote from Susan Napier from Anime from Akira to How's Moving Castle Experiencing Japanese Animation. Susan Napier says that, however, is the film's inclusion of these brilliantly presented childhood memories that is only yesterday's greatest strength by suggesting the richness of personal memory that lives within every human. As opposed to the obvious tropes of farmers planting in the field and milking cows, the delicate psychological moments encapsulated in personal memory resonate deeply, and it is the combination of the two that gives the film its particular power. So I definitely think it's the combination is that this is what makes Only Yesterday special. Susan Napier's saying the memories are kind of the strong part of the film, which I think I agree with. I think I like the young Taiko parts a lot more than the
I think you're supposed to. Like, they look better, they're more fun. and there's a lot more dialogue in those moments than in we spend a lot of time with her as an adult either just doing the memories because she's telling them to Toshio, or she's just
staring out a train window or something. So exactly. I think in terms of how they come together, the first half of this movie, by the way, I didn't say this in my initial thoughts. This movie is 2 hours. I think that the worst thing I can say about it, because I connect with so much of the movie, is that this movie is very slow and kind of a little bit hard to get through. I'll say that.
That's absolutely
I will say that.
How I felt. My thing is you're halfway through the movie before adult Taiko even like talks to someone.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The first half of the movie is dominated by young Taiko. So probably 90% of the screen time is young Taiko in the first half of the movie. And then that starts to reverse as we go into the second half, as we build up to her decision.
Which I will say is interesting for me. The whole time watching the first hour of the movie, I was like, what is she doing? Like, as an adult, like, that was me. Like, I'm like, where are we going? What are we doing? Like,
yeah,
I want to see what happens. And then it was interesting that I was like, JK, I want the cute memories back.
It's interesting. Yeah, I love Delaney. Like, this is kind of why I was trying to get different perspectives in the series of like people watching something for the first time, people who've seen something a million times. And even though kind of a lot of Michelle and I's response to Delaney is like it'll work better in subsequent viewings, it doesn't mean that it's invalid. What you're getting from watching it the first time. And I do think it's just an interesting perspective to bring to the table. I think probably a lot of people listening watched it for the first time and are agreeing with Delaney. And so, maybe this discussion will help people eventually get there with subsequent viewings, or maybe not. I think it's also just valid to just not connect with it on any number of viewings. But the younger Taiko scenes, I mean, to kind of wrap up the different animation discussion, we've been bouncing around a ton of things, which is great. We've hit on all the major topics, really, and even the environmentalism. But the something that really hit on me for that was just more noticeable for me this viewing was this frame. I mentioned in the past quotes, but all the younger Taiko scenes have like a frame around them and the sides, a white that gives the ethereal nature that I kind of described of the past Taiko. So, and they are very pastel colored and stuff. So I love the animation presentation of past Taiko, even though it is this more conventional style. On Wikipedia right now, I haven't found a source for this, not confirmed. It says that they did the voices after the animation for past Taiko, but before the animation for older Taiko. Which is like how they're able to shape the facial muscles more to the dialogue. I think that's interesting if you look into that. And apparently most anime is the voices are done after the animation, which I know is true of some later Miyazaki movies because I saw that in some documentaries. And then the connection of the two, I mean, we're right, as we've hit on, this movie has some explicit moments. She says in the movie, I didn't intend for 10-year-old me to come along with me on this trip, but when she showed up, she won't leave me alone. And she at one point says she's tagging along so she like help her rethink her life. And we mentioned the metamorphosis of the butterfly or whatever. So I think that's kind of like how the movie presents the tying in, and then we're kind of bringing it together to this transformation moment at the end. And there's a moment I think early on when younger Taiko's there on the train, but the main thing is definitely at the end when all the younger Taiko and all the kids can show up when she's on the train coming back, which I think is so strikingly presented after you see these two distinctive styles for all the earlier parts of the movie. So yeah, I mean, I think we've mostly covered all the different animation aspects, and I think we were also talking about how the ending is open-ended, so I want to bring on a quote in on this relating to the context of Takahata's films. This is going back to Colin, Odell, and Michelle LeBlanc. They say, although a poignant film filled with hope, Only Yesterday tempers its nostalgia with the sense of dreams unfulfilled and of a childhood that was marked by inaction. In many ways, Takahata's films are about imperfection and compromise. They affect their audience on an emotional level precisely because they mirror the truth. The artifice of animation takes on a wider universality because Takahata's characters are flawed but believable, the resolution of the film rarely resolving the story. Definitely think this movie cuts off, is open-ended. I love the connection here with the inaction. Think of Grave of the Fireflies. That movie is a lot about the flawed nature of the protagonist or his inaction. And so, we're looking. This movie's so different from Grave of the Fireflies, but also very much feels like Takahata in its realism. It's like these flawed main character, but so realistic main characters, and we get this theme of kind of inaction. But in this movie, she's able to turn it around, before everyone starves to death. So, like, that's, I guess that's kind of the difference.
On a scale of 1 to 10, it's not a 1, is what you're saying.
So
an action.
It's interesting. So I didn't know so I've seen Grave of the Fireflies, and I watched it years ago, and I didn't know, I was not aware that Studio Ghibli, you have kind of like these, you have Takahata movies and then you have Miyazaki movies. I was not aware of this, I guess you could say dynamic. And so it's interesting that you bring that up about, and you'd mentioned it earlier, of course, about Grave of the Fireflies, because I think that might be, and I don't think having flawed protagonists is bad, but I think that's probably, this is, maybe I just don't like this kind of movie. Like,
I don't think it has as much of a universal appeal at the
Yeah, because it's not escapist in a fun way, which again I think is something like Miyazaki is so good at doing. Like he gives this almost hyperbolic sense of wonder and nostalgia sometimes, but this is I kind of honestly would say I love the flashbacks because they're so incomplete and it's full of so many unrealized things. Like we never get the impression that she does date that boy who had a crush on her, the good athlete that she admired on the field. We never get the sense that she does like learn how to figure out math, even though like it implies that like when she's drawing the graph on the back of her paper that maybe the issue is simply that she's a visual learner and she needs to draw out symbols to make the connection of how fractions and multiplication works. Or even like she was so good at acting in the school play to the point where like the older students wanted her in their production. And when her dad said no, her mom also told her like, okay, your friend or your classmate got asked about the role. Do not tell her you were offered it first. Because like for her mom, it's like, don't brag about that. It'll just make her feel bad. But for the protagonist, it's like, it sucks that she can't like be proud of this thing she's so good at and see where it takes her. And she does like say like, yeah, I tried like drama in high school and I didn't love it. So it's fine. But like, you always wonder like if she had like continued from such a young age, maybe she could have been someone successful in that field. So like all that unrealized potential, I feel like it's a big part of like the melancholy of life anyway, because when you're a kid, you're a lot of times told you can do anything. But the truth is you can only be really good at a very few amount of things because it takes a very long time to get very good at anything at all. So you do have to make executive decisions about what to pursue. And that leads to an endless list of things you'll never really get to see realized. And I feel like that's something this movie really harkens back to, which again, like it's like, I don't know, kind of soothing in a like, yes, I see that, I understand sort of way, like that, like me too, same. But it also is a little like, oh yeah, there are a lot of things you just never find out the answers to. And that's like the part of life maybe you never stop thinking about. Like, I do think it's interesting that she has all these negative memories, like you were saying, Delaney, sharing with these people. But I think that's because like those what if memories are the ones you hold on to the longest because like there's something that drives you about wanting to know how it could have been. Whereas a really happy memory, it's not going to like plague your thoughts the same way just because like it's a good thing. So you don't really have to think about it more than that. But I feel like when I share a lot of past things, if it's not like a very specific thing I like, it is a lot of like, man, like I wonder what would have happened if I'd like done that thing instead of this thing. Or like if I'd found out if that person did really like me, but I was too scared because it's the third grade or whatever. So I really feel that with the memory section of this movie.
Like you can give it say if you agree after. I totally agree with what Michelle is saying about it. Like like for me, like all my most formative memories are like negative memories in my head. Like, and it sucks, but somehow it's like embarrassment. Like I just am so likely to remember it. Like happiness, no. And we're talking about the experience of the nature of memory that this movie presents, the powerfulness of memories from that quote. I do think that's one of the most striking parts of the movie. I think this is probably the best presentation of how memories can affect you. And like there are these times when I just get so like drawn into just remembering things that don't matter and and nothing she's thinking about really matters, but it's just what's important is she's just reflecting and it's impacting her in the like. So yeah, I think like up there with like the distinctive use of it, the animation styles is just the nature of memories, like the way that this movie portrays it, I think is so incredible.
And I will say, so the thing that's really important, I think, about when she kind of really starts to consider Toshio for real, we're in that car when she like leaves after the grandmas hound her about marrying him and everything, and it's all too much for her. She's processing this memory from her childhood of this boy that she hated, who she just found so disgusting. And she's being really real with Toshio. Like, she's like, he was really poor, like he was gross, he would like wipe his nose on his sleeves. Like, I thought he was like so like more disgusting than normal boy, like disgusting in part because he was like poor, and that's what ostracized him from the class. But also he would pick on me, and that sucked. And Toshio, being a man with boy memories, has this dude insight that like she never would have gotten, and he tells her like, well, you know, it sounds like he probably had a crush on you. Like, think about it. And then like you can see her in real time reforming her evaluation of a memory where she saw him holding his dad's hand on the street like a normal kid. He sees her and he suddenly like shoulders up and swaggers, and his dad even calls him out on it. He's like, what are you doing? Why are you walking that way? And she gets it like for the first time, and it totally rewrites this assumed memory she'd had for her whole life that he just hated her too. He actually had a crush on her. And like for her, I feel like part of what makes that a big deal, it's like Toshio becomes this person who has this amazing perspective that she doesn't have herself, and that becomes a very attractive quality. Like, I think it's that he can share his perspective and maybe change the way she looks at the world. Like, he's already changing the way she looks at like her past memories, and that itself is like kind of really appealing and cool, and it brings them closer together. So I think like that's the reason that scene is where it is, so close to the end of the movie when she decides to go back. Like, again, Toshio isn't the whole point of her going back, but I do think like that was one of the moments that really made me go like, oh yeah, Toshio, like your bonus points for that. It was good use of yourself there.
I love that framing of that scene in the romance, but I also just, I don't know, because I've struggled like to understand that scene of the shaking the poor kid's hand. I love the way you phrase that, of like that scene is totally just about reframing memories and getting outside of your own perspective on your own memories.
Because all we have is our own perspective until like someone tells us differently. And like, I'm sure you guys have had this where like you'll be with family members and you'll tell them a memory you had, and they'll be like, that's not right, like that's not how it happened. And they'll share this bit that like totally like you didn't even think of anymore because it wasn't relevant to you when you were forming that memory. But it kind of makes you realize that my memory isn't perfect, and it's really just like the way that I have decided to frame the story of myself that I want to tell. And that's like kind of narrow in its own way. Yeah,
like totally. Like she's 10. Like none of these memories are real, right? Like I don't have almost any memories of that time that immediately come to mind. And she's totally been influenced by probably people recalling it and stuff. And so it's not even like the factual nature, I feel like, of what's going on. It's these memories as an insight into her psyche and how how her life is went and how she's thinking about things now.
Yeah,
and like that's the power of them. And I feel like that's what the movie's capturing. Man. Yeah, I love that reframing thing. I also think that the scene with the poor kid has stuff to do about like that time when she's like, I hated him most of all. Like that's pretty powerful too. It's like when you pretend to be like above this like this bad presentation of other people, but really on the inside you identify it as something like that. That's always struck me as powerful. And then just the like kind of the commentary on class disparity, I think is definitely there too.
It's interesting
about that? Yeah,
because like she at the beginning of the flashbacks, it seems like she's a little uncomfortable with the fact that her girlfriends might have more money than her because they can afford to go on summer vacation trips, and she always has to stay in the town. But compared to that boy, she's like nowhere near, as poor as him. And that puts her somewhere like on a scale, an economic scale.
A little of that, and also she doesn't have like relatives in the country to go to. Her ties to the city are all she has is the city, and I think that's a big part of the ending. Is it's the first memory with like she's nowhere to go home to go on vacation in the country is maybe the most important to her ultimate decision, which is like I've only experienced this one thing my whole life. I've only had the ability to experience this one thing my whole life in the city. I need to do something new here. Delaney, any comments on this memory, the discussion we're having?
I mean, I think it's definitely like I think this interpretation is very interesting, and like it's extremely valid. Like no one remembers like everything you only, like Michelle was saying, you only have your perspective. That's the only way you remember things. And I definitely think at the end when Toshio is actually like interpreting her memory and like being like, well, what if it was this? That for me was definitely like a really, like, for me, it kind of like the memory suddenly started to make more sense, which like for me, how I interpreted the memories, and when we talked about the negative memories, was that a lot of it was she has never got to make a decision for herself or do anything she wants to do. Like, things never go her way. Which, when she's a 10-year-old, it's interpreted as her being a spoiled brat. When in fact, she is extremely, like, limited and, like, she's the youngest, her sisters are significantly older than her, and her parents are a bit controlling. And she's not like her other sisters, and so she gets, kind of the rough end of the deal all the time. And now as an adult, she's just like, well, I live in Tokyo. I'm going to work in an office in Tokyo. But then she actually gets to do something she's always wanted to do, to go to the countryside. And so for me, that was more like, that's really what I was getting out of the memories, was this, when she was 10, it's very much, and everyone's experienced this. Everyone's been like 13. They've been like, oh my God, my mom won't let me go out and hang out with my friends. She's the worst human on earth. Like, why wouldn't she let me leave the house? And so it's interesting how and considering these memories we experience, she is a well-rounded person. Like her interactions with is it Nako?
Who? The kid in or her
older
sister?
the farm kid, not Nanako. The farm kid.
Naoko, yeah.
Naoko. So, and her interactions with her, I thought, were some of the more compelling parts. Because for me, that was more compelling, was her, like, going through these memories. And then Naoko is, like, she experiences the inverse of what they experience, extremely similar situations. Because, again, like, there is some universality to these experiences that these characters are having. But then also the flip side of she is growing up in the countryside versus Taiko growing up in Tokyo. So I don't know so much about the, like, there's not much context to these memories. So it's hard to say, like, did this really happen? Obviously, she didn't actually walk up into the sky. But, like, it's interesting, like,
yeah,
this unreliable narrator.
Yeah, and I guess I feel like it's not as much whether it like happens or not specifically. Although it's interesting because we're not intended to question. Although maybe at the end when Toshio helps her reframe her memory, that maybe we are supposed to start to question the exact nature of some of these things. But I feel like that's maybe not as much and we don't have a specific thing the movie's asking for us to do.
And we don't have any other characters. Like, she talks to her sister, which I'm not 100% sure which sister she's talking to.
Yeah. Well, so this is something I was going to say is, what this is making me think of, this discussion. I think Michelle was basically talking about this, but like it's not Toshio, like her romance with Toshio. I feel like it's not important. Like, I feel like what's important about being with Toshio is her having someone.
Yeah,
like, this is so general, but just she's having someone to talk to her age, talk about her experiences with, that can help her reframe her experiences, like, and talk about these past traumas, that she can discuss, like, this nature and the state of the world and these ideals with. Like, that's what's so great about Toshio, is his ability to connect with her, and her just, like, having a person. Like, it's so generic, the basic component of romance, but just having a person to experience life with. I feel like that's all that's happening with Toshio.
You're stealing, like, my grand Toshio discussion, but you're not wrong, so it's okay.
No.
Well, that was inspired by what you said, so Michelle.
The whole movie, I was thinking, like, wow, why do I like Toshio so much? Like, why is he the best man I've ever seen in a movie? And it's because, like, when we see movies made, like, from men, even if they're about girls a lot of times, like, they're so obsessed with, like, this idea of the male love interest proving themselves to the girl, to the point where, like, they can't not turn them down because the gesture they made, like, is such a big deal, or it's so grand that it's just, like, it just proves their love. And Toshio is literally, like, he's nice to her. He listens to her every time she tells him a story. He talks to her through her thoughts. He offers his perspective. He doesn't have any seemingly expectations about where their relationship's going to go. He is simply enjoying her company the same way she is enjoying his. And ultimately, like, it's really in her hands if she wants to, like, do anything with him, like, in the future. Yeah. And I think, like, that's, like, all the best stuff because, yeah, he's literally just a supportive companion. I feel like if this is, like, a drama for adult women to kind of, like, you know, enjoy it, like, that's why Toshio works so well. He's there to be a support in every sense of that word, like in terms of just, like, you know, challenging her thoughts, but also, like, helping her do, like, the handiwork and just being a nice, emotionally stable presence by her side, potentially forever. Like, there's nothing remarkable about Toshio besides the fact that he can do all those things, and the bar is so low for men that makes him very remarkable. But that's, like, really it. Like, I don't know a lot about Toshio. He likes talking about, you know, organic plants and farming. He really likes farming. I don't know what he thinks about literally anything else, and that's fine because he's not the main character, and he's enough for Seiko because he is a part of her life, not her whole life. I feel like that comes across really clear in the movie, which is why he never ever is, like, in a position to make a grand gesture because he is not her everything. He's just, like, a great person to have around potentially forever.
Y'all, I'm having a breakthrough about this movie.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Okay, here's my breakthrough. Okay,
share the breakthrough.
Okay, so here's my breakthrough. So, like, and again, talking about, like, you know, as a child, like, she was very controlled. Like, she's never had any agency in her whole life. None. Like, you know, talking about this being a 10-year-old in the restrictive Japanese society and the time in which she grew up. And then now she's an adult in the 80s, where there are less restrictions. She's an adult living on her own in Tokyo. She can do whatever she wants, but she doesn't know what to do. And so she's just stuck in this rut being, you know, the, you know, power, you know, Tokyo, you know, feminist, like, lady she is, you know, living on her own. And then she's like, you know, she talks to Toshio. Well, a lot of people do it. Like, everybody does. All my friends are like this. And so, you know, so all these memories are, you know, moments where people made decisions for her or things didn't work out the way she wanted them to. And then now she's an adult and she's doing something she's always wanted to do. And so for me, this is restructuring the ending for me. And so part of what we're talking about with Toshio, the reason Toshio is so great and having that my person, like, no one has ever listened to her in her whole life. Like, no one ever, like, is like, yeah, Taiko, I agree with you. Like, no one is on her side. Like, no one in her family is on her side. Her mom's not on her side. Her dad's almost on her side, like, once. And then, like, no one is on her side. And, like, she can't rely on anyone. Like, even her friends, like, immediately embarrass her, like, Memory 2. And then, like, and so there's never, like, we have connections with characters, but there's never in, like, she's always, like, the odd one out. Like, she is kind of, like, everyone thinks she's too naive or that she's, you know, too dumb or whatever. And which is why I think these moments with, you know, like, these powerful moments with the boys, which is maybe not necessarily the best that it's always with dudes, but, like, we have, like, you know, when she's talking to Hirohara and being like, oh, cloudy weather's what I like too. And they smile at each other. It's like, finally, someone agrees with me on something. and then we get to her as an adult and she's, like, doing what she's always wanted to do. She's going on vacation. And then she's finally and then the ending is her finally letting herself have what she's always wanted because she's never been able to do that before, but she's been afraid of it because her whole life is her living the way she's supposed to. And she's only ever lived in Tokyo. That's all she knows. And so then talking to Toshio and, like, he's so understanding and she finally has power in these situations. She's older than them. Toshio has no authority over her. And, you know, she gets to be this role model for Naoko. And so Naoko. And so she, so this is, like, this very powerful moment of her realizing she has agency and her being like, I'm going to go live on this farm because I want to.
Yeah.
I want to do stuff. And for once, and also, she finally found something she likes to do. Like,
exactly.
Her whole life, she's like, oh, I kind of like she, like you were talking about, Michelle. She didn't get to, she did eventually get to explore that she liked doing theater.
Not when she wanted to.
But not when she wanted to. Like, they were like, no. And so she's never got to do anything on her own terms. And so finally, she's like, well, I'm not going to go back to my job because I don't want to.
And I'm an adult, so suck it.
And I'm an adult, and I can do what I want. And so I really think maybe that's why I've interpreted so much of her being naive and suddenly realizing how the world works when she's 27. Because it finally feels like she figured out that she can do whatever she wants because she's 27.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're presenting, this is a lot of Michelle and I's interpretation of the ending. I think that's a great presentation of a lot of it. But yeah, she's finally choosing to carve her own path and do what she wants. And there's a person who will support her in that. I think the point of like, Toshio's younger than her and like she has a lot of power in what she's doing. I think that's a great point. Like it's kind of a perfect person for her when she's been suppressed by men through a lot of her life. Especially the father, who I think comes across very badly.
Yes. Oh my god. Well, okay. There's like in the beginning, me and my fiance were like, "Oh, I only like the dad," and then we're like, "I don't like the dad anymore."
Quiet.
You learned that he's the worst of all.
Yeah, and then we were like, "JK, I'm out. I don't like." It was we literally just verbalized that, and then we were like, "Nope, JK, I don't like the dad anymore."
I do like Delaney's point about Neiko, the teenager, because it is also true that for Teiko, she was the youngest of three girls in her family. So she was used to being the one everyone told what to do because she was the baby. But now she gets to kind of older sister someone else, which is another form of power she's not used to having.
Yeah, it's just it's like her choosing to do something she wants to do in an environment that is supports her doing that. Yeah. It's so simple but that's like the universality of it, and also just it's simple, but it's complex, and it does take a while to kind of like interpret all this that the movie's getting at. And for a movie that is so explicit about some things, I do think it is it is a little bit it doesn't necessarily hold your hand completely in arriving at this interpretation of the ending.
An hour and a half later, I finally figured it out.
I mean, I think it's that's an interpretation of the movie. Like, if that was text versus subtext, a lot of this stuff it would have said it more. Yeah. So I think it's valid to not not tap into that or say that doesn't matter as much as other things. But these are all like totally reasons why I really connect with the ending now. And I think like I love I didn't necessarily get there with this framing of Toshio, which I really love, just as like a supportive person.
Yes, that's all we want. If we're gonna be with the guy, it's literally all we want. You don't have to be special. Just be nice and be there and give us your own perspective. And that's one thing, because like up till then, she's just telling people her memories and everyone's just taking it at face value. That's the first time he really like offers something different for her to think about. And I think, again, that's part of why like he works in that moment. Because like if you're gonna be with someone long term, they can't just like not have anything to say and have their own thoughts and feelings, you know? Like that's part of why I just love Toshio. He's literally the best.
Most of their scenes are just them talking, like, and Toshio's just talking about like, here's my perspective on organic farming. And we do know a few other things about Toshio. He did work in an office. He left to do farming. And he's like a ski instructor. Yeah. But these things almost don't matter. And then like he talks about the themes of the movie in terms of farming is like a collaboration between humans and nature. It's something we could get into more, but what we've discussed is more interesting, honestly. So, but it's like, and those, I mean, I think she like finds that appealing, but you're right. It's just, they're just talking and sharing their perspectives and supporting each other, and that's kind of it.
That's all you need.
That's kind of all we ultimately want. Yeah, I love that. And in that respect, isn't the movie a grand romance because it's finding the most basic element of companionship? These two people,
but it's still mostly about her. So like I wouldn't like
it's framed from the perspective of
life, maybe, which Toshio is a part of, I guess, tangentially.
Right. That's I mean, that is how I see it. Yeah. I love all these conclusions. To close things out, hit on a few of the memory scenes in a little bit more detail. We talked about the pineapple scene, which is my favorite scene in the movie. I'll read a quote about the pineapple scene from Colin, Odell, and Michelle Blanc. 1966 saw Japan on the upturn and set the scene for a subsequent economic standing. This can be best illustrated in the scene where Taiko's father brings home a pineapple for the family to share, a hugely expensive item and a sign the family's growing prosperity. However, as no one actually knows how to prepare the fruit, they have to wait to find out. Watching in awe, his mother eventually slices and serves it with great ceremony. When the fruit is finally eaten, the family admits to disappointment as the end result. It is a disappointment that mirrors Taiko's life when her dreams of becoming an actress are coming to fruition only to be shattered by her father's conservatisime, which I think is an interesting point. But just the pineapple scene, I've always been in love with this scene. I've talked about it on the podcast before, but like just I feel like the emotions displayed are so unique in what I've seen portrayed by media before, specifically this like persistent, like excitement even in the face of disappointment, just like trying to keep at it that young Taiko does, and trying to convince herself that this is great, and relative to expectations. And just the family's like in awe of the pineapple and like figuring out how to eat it. And like, I love every second of it. It's one of my favorite of these like slice of life scenes you'll see in this type of, so that the manga is based on, like that, this type of manga or anime. And I feel like there's a lot of amazing, I think the scene with the Hirota, the baseball player, like, and then them meeting it then when she soars it, but just that whole scene, I think that's like incredible. One thing we haven't talked at all about, which I think is one of the most unique scenes of the movie,
is it the period one?
The period
yes,
one,
they talk about periods. It's so exciting.
No piece of media has discussed, has not said the word period as many times as this movie does.
Yeah, as many times for sure.
The best part,
I think that's one of its most distinctive feminist elements, is how open it is with the experiences of young girls in periods.
It's really funny to me, like when it starts, like as soon as like the announcement, all boys go to the gym, and then we load into the girls, and I was like, oh no. And my fiance had not really been watching the like she watches with me, but she doesn't, not some movies she doesn't hone in on. She did not hone in on this movie. And like, at some point she was like, what are they? And I was like, I know exactly what's happening right now and I'm displeased about it. And because it's exactly what happened when I was in middle school. And so like, and it's one of those, I do. And I think my favorite character is her friend that who's like, oh, I've had a period and it's nothing to be ashamed about, and she just like reacts to all the boys like, you're dumb. And I was like, you are my favorite character, you are the best 10-year-old girl ever.
She just like lets it roll off her so effortlessly, which like honestly, if I was like 10, I would not be able to do that. And the fact that like Taiko's like genuinely concerned, like, is this gonna hurt? Like, am I catching a disease if I sit too close with the girl? Am I gonna suddenly get my period? Like it's the chicken pox or something? Like those are the kind of concerns kids really have, but it's so little talked about. Like kids don't really understand what a period is until they actually get a period. And before then it's all just like fantasy imaginings of what a period is.
Yeah, that young girl, very composed and put together compared to especially Taiko, but everyone else. But yeah, I think that scene captures the just embarrassment of maturing at that age for sure. That's kind of what we're
also
Taiko's
full stop
experiencing.
Boys suck, and
very much captures
the
nature of young boys. Yeah,
and then just. And they just capture all like when they just like when the boys start stuff and they just start hitting them with the brooms. I'm like, yes, they just.
Oh my gosh!
Also, there are no adults ever. There is never a single adult ever.
Yeah.
I feel like especially for a movie that takes place in the 60s, it's like I feel like one thing that I really noticed is a lot of times like her memories might involve boys, but she hardly ever like socializes with boys her own age. Like they feel very genderly segregated, which like is why I think when she talks to the athletic boy, like it's so realistic that she wouldn't like have a clue who this guy is, but all her friends, like it's something to do is to mess with her and talk to this boy behind her back. So they do it. But when she actually sees him practicing in the game, she's like, oh wow, like he's really good at this. Like, ooh, his like confidence is like exciting to me. I don't know how I feel anymore. And when he chases her down and asks her about the weather, I love it because it's like, it shows that they don't really know each other as people. And it's like that one moment of trying to connect on a personal level where it's not just like this cute girl he sees like, you know, down the hall. It's like an actual person who may or may not like cloudy weather as much as him. And when they both like kind of share that similarity, it's like they're a boy and a girl in a very like gendered school, but they both like cloudy weather the most. And that kind of unites them in this way that I don't think they normally get with people of the opposite sex at that age too, which is just so cute and wholesome, honestly.
Yeah, I totally think all of that is what that scene is capturing. I think that's one of the best ones, and I think the pineapple scene, the period scene, we mentioned in the beginning her sister Yaiko. She was crazy about some actress, and she's like holding a picture and blushing, and Yeah, that's definitely how
And
I
then she said
interpret
something
that.
like, "I told you to knock." And I'm like, "What were
Yeah,
you doing?"
Yeah,
Well,
right, and she's
angry about her
embarrassed about it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, "You're gay."
Surprise!
She's
you're gay.
she's the gay older sister, and then the married older sister to I don't know. Yeah, I'm trying to remember in the present who she's talking to.
Yeah, I'm not sure which sister.
It must be the middle sister, because she was the one who was really into like jewelry and makeup, and who made a big deal about like, I don't want to give her my old purse. Like, I like my purse.
Well, so the connection she has with the countryside is whichever sister she's talking to's husband's family.
Yes.
I think is. So I hope it's not Yaiko.
Yeah, because she's right. Family. Well, because she's like, thanks to you, I wouldn't even have a family in the countryside.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
She found it through one of the sisters marrying someone with that connection. Yeah. The other scenes from when she's younger, I think we briefly talked about when she can't divide fractions. There's a whole thing about that. I think that there's the scene of them debating, running in the halls, and the snooty smart girl making the argument. It's pretty great.
When I saw that, I was like, I hope she becomes a politician later in life. She's so good already.
And then we briefly talked about Taiko's her role in the school play, and her like inflating the role. And then her dad just like not even entertaining her being in the college kids play. But between that and the hitting her and then the scene he hits her is after the purse, and then they're going out to eat and she doesn't want to go. Just very, very much capturing, I think, the kind of repressive nature of the society around her and the effect that had on her growing up. But all those scenes are really special, I think. I definitely think that, but the context we talked about in which they play into her being older. And we haven't talked about the farming stuff, nature stuff as much, but I think we hit on like it in relation to her and Toshio. I don't know, any other characters, Michelle, from we haven't talked about, you have thoughts on?
No, not that I can really think of. I feel like for a while she had like that group of like 3-ish girls who were her friends, but I don't think we got a lot of one-on-one time with any of them. I feel like they were all like relatively like strongish relationships of hers as a 10-year-old, but I don't think she had like a super standout best friend or anything.
Yeah. Oh, a random note. One thing I'll throw in at the end here is from Susan Napier. When Taiko returns to the country at the end of the film, she vows not to bring her 5th grade self with her. This can be read as a desire to be liberated from the selfish individual self and become part of a richer communal fabric. So I think this movie is another entry into our supportive collective, even though it's not a Miyazaki film.
I see that.
Kind of her choosing, going away from the individualistic life in the city, maybe the capitalistic life, and going to the communal, supportive, socialist type of life in the countryside, which she's embracing very much in theme with these other Miyazaki movies we're talking about.
It's still nice, though, because like when she's in the country, you get the sense that she's still going to be her own boss, whereas when she was in Tokyo, she was just like a peon. She was just like an employee for an office that had like a quota that she needed to fulfill. So like I feel like you don't lose track of like the fact that it's still like on her terms very much, and she'll be in maybe a lot more direct control of her life being in the country too. Yeah. Even if like, she's not alone, like she's still going to be independent in a way that she can, call her own shots still, which like I feel like many of us can't really do that in our day-to-day job. So a little of that is aspirational, I guess.
Yeah, I hope that's what she finds in the countryside. Yeah, and I think that's a big appealing nature of it, too. I think the movie presents that. Delaney, anything else from Only Yesterday? Any final thoughts?
I will say I think I'm more on board. No, after the discourse. A little more sold.
Okay. We'll look forward to you revisiting it in 5 years.
Yeah,
in 5 years.
5 years time.
That's how it works with this type of movie. Yeah. Okay, that's good. And I think you definitely brought first time Only Yesterday viewer perspective to to the table here, which I think is good. I'm interested if other people are watching it for the first time, had similar experiences to Delaney, how people interpret it, like the romance, because I know I think we interpret it differently. I've seen a lot of people interpret that differently. Love to see comments from everyone about that. Michelle, any other final thoughts?
It's a good movie. I'm really glad they made a 2-hour movie all about a lady. That's always great. Please make more.
Yes, retweet.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's the next Studio Ghibli one in this vein? I mean, when you said that she's the oldest protagonist, I'm like, except for Howl's kind of. Kind of.
No, Sophie's aging 22, and her aging into grandma is not like mental aging, so it does not count, Dylan.
She's visually grandma.
No, it's not.
Well, yeah. What's the next movie like this? I mean, we'll see what Ocean Waves is. I've seen it, but I don't remember as much.
Ocean Waves. I have no idea.
No one's seen Ocean Waves, so we're getting close
you
to.
couldn't find it online. That's why.
Only this movie is at all comparable to you not being able to find.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess A Whisper of the Heart is in the vein of this movie of a girl's experience, not a woman, but a girl's experiences and her reflecting on her life and stuff. I think there's a lot of similarities we could talk about.
Because like Spirited Away is much more like Kiki in that it's like a coming of age story for sure.
Yeah, and I do think Kiki. We didn't talk as much about the Kiki similarity, Kiki similarities to this. I think we contrasted it with. We talked about Kiki's network of women a lot. Kiki interacted with a ton of women.
Oh,
in this
yeah.
movie there. She does interact.
Yeah,
with
this is like the opposite.
Yeah,
and which I think
the city to have a grand life, and she goes to the country to have a grand life.
Yes.
Well, they're going in opposite directions. Yeah, it's interesting.
But it's both on their own terms. That's what's important.
Yeah, maybe finding similar things. Yeah, finding the agency at different times of their life.
They are both extremely grumpy little girls.
Yes, relatable.
Relatable. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Let us know any thoughts. You guys had it only yesterday. Find all the ways to comment or contact us at overlyanimated.com. Consider supporting us on Patreon if you enjoyed this. Patreon.com/overlyanimated. Thanks to all our current patrons, especially our patron of the podcast, Phoenician. And thanks as always to our patron executive producers, Ryan, Steve, Alex, Beatrice, Hugh, Michael, Needle, and Phoenician. Next up, back to Miyazaki for Porco Rosso. Probably a very different movie from this one. Maybe we'll find similarities. I don't know.
Way more airplanes than this movie.
Yeah, no, you can tell it's not a Miyazaki movie because there's no airplanes in this movie. Only a train. There's Kiki. There's a train in Kiki. There you go.
And a dirigible.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have the whole Hindenburg in Kiki.
Yeah, not here though. But yeah, we'll be talking Porco Rosso next week, and then the highly anticipated Ocean Waves podcast.
Highly anticipated. I hope.
Highly anticipated by me.
Okay, good.
I'll say that one. No pressure on that one. I don't think I'll find many articles on Ocean Waves to cite. So I think we can just talk about it. Anyway, okay. Thanks, guys, for listening. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.